Welcome back. You're watching the archive where we document stones not praised for beauty, but feared for what they refuse to let in. For centuries, certain minerals weren't cut or worn for luck. They weren't carried to invite anything in. They were chosen to block, to hold the line between the living and something else. Some absorbed more than light, some reflected what wasn't supposed to be seen. Others simply made things vanish. Across empires and borderless rituals, these stones weren't symbols. They were instruments, used when no prayer worked, when mirrors cracked, when silence pressed from the inside. This episode traces 10 gemstones that darkness didn't pass, not because they radiated good, but because they confused, trapped, or erased what should not have followed. If this is your first time at the archive, feel free to like and subscribe. Now, let's begin with the 10th ranked stone. Top number 10. Apache Tear. The grief stone darkness won't follow. Throughout the late 1800s, missionaries noted an unusual resistance when asking families to part with these stones. They were rarely passed down and never traded, and often buried with those considered half-pulled, people whose final hours were marked by trance, muttering, or speaking in voices not their own. It doesn't look like a weapon. Rough, black, sometimes semi-translucent, small enough to fit in a closed hand. But in Apache tradition, this stone is not worn. It's carried, silently, deliberately, and always alone. The name Apache Tear emerged from 19th century American retellings of a massacre in the Arizona Territory. Dozens of Apache warriors, cut off and surrounded by cavalry, chose to leap from a cliff rather than be captured. According to legend, their families mourned for days, and the earth wept black tears where they fell. That part is folklore. But the stones, they're real, volcanic glass, obsidian formed without the polish, born not from carving, but from violent eruption. Apache Tear is a variety of pearlite obsidian, uniquely lightweight, porous beneath the surface, and jet black until held against the sun. Early ethnographers recorded its use not as decoration, but as a containment tool. Among Western Apache clans, a tear stone was sometimes placed beside the body of someone who had died under spiritual confusion, when it wasn't clear if the soul had crossed safely. Not to guide, to seal. In some desert settlements near New Mexico and northern Chihuahua, Apache Tear became a private measure against what the people called shadow recall, a condition where a spirit might return if it had unfinished rage. The tear was carried during mourning, not to ease grief, but to take it in, so it wouldn't be left roaming. Even now, those who handle the stone in ritual are instructed never to let it come into contact with water, not because it's fragile, but because water, in Apache cosmology, loosens memory, and no one wants to remember what the tear absorbed. To outsiders, Apache Tear is a collectible, a curiosity labeled with tourist lore. To those who kept their proper role, it was never about remembrance. It was containment, a soft vessel for rage, confusion, and sorrow that did not get closure. Some things, they believed, should not echo. Top 9. Nuummite, the stone that bound ancient darkness. In 12th century Icelandic grimoires, Nuummite is named indirectly, only as the mirror of buried will. Sorcerers and spirit workers used it to bind not the dead, but what clung to the dead. It became part of sealing rites, placed above thresholds, wrapped in wool, or pressed into the base of ceremonial staffs carved for directional warding. Its function wasn't to repel. It was to isolate. It wasn't buried. It waited. Nuummite, a dark metamorphic stone found only in Greenland, is composed of ancient amphibole minerals, some of which are dated to be over 3 billion years old. But geology alone doesn't explain its presence in ritual caches across Scandinavia, Iceland, and later in unexpected altars found in Greenlandic burial grounds. What drew attention wasn't just its age, but the way it absorbed light yet shimmered in motion, as if hiding something, moving just beneath the surface. Among Inuit and Norse oral traditions, specific stones were considered holders of the first fire. Remnants from before time had rhythm. Nuummite, with its flash of bronze and black, was believed to contain echoes of the original conflict, where light first resisted darkness. Not everyone was allowed to hold it. In Greenlandic oral accounts preserved by Danish anthropologists in the 19th century, shamans used Nuummite in a rite called Anasokar Tornek, loosely translated as splitting the follower. The ritual was invoked when a person believed they were being pursued, not by a spirit but by something older, something not quite dead and not quite alive. Nuummite was placed beneath the person's sleeping mat with sealskin insulators and carved ivory markers facing the four cardinal points. The idea wasn't to trap the entity, but to force it to reveal whether it was truly following or merely feeding from fear. If the stone changed color by morning, the rite had failed. If it remained cold and matte, the darkness had no grip. By the 1700s, such rites disappeared. But Nuummite remained feared. Greenlandic miners in the 20th century reported finding double shadow pockets, caves where sound dropped, and compasses failed to function. In almost every case, a cluster of Nuummite was present. Collectors today praise the stone for its ancient age. However, those who know its origin don't display it openly. They wrap it, store it, and for those raised in the old traditions, they never turn their back on it. Top 8. Black Jade, the barrier that let nothing in. When a soul fractured or an ancestral spirit was believed to be misled, black jade was used not to call them home, but to keep what followed from entering. In the southern mountains of Hunan, ritualists embedded the stone into riverbeds near ghost bridges, areas where travelers disappeared or returned speaking of dreams they hadn't lived. It was never sold, it was selected. In ancient China, black jade was not mined for beauty. It was extracted for one purpose: to block. While nephrite and jadeite were prized for color and carving, the rare black variant, often mixed with magnetite or actinolite, was reserved for those who needed protection beyond the physical. It wasn't shaped into jewelry. It wasn't gifted in court. It was hidden, stitched into inner linings, sewn into burial robes, or placed inside the threshold stones of Taoist shrines where exorcism rites were held. The Zhenwu texts of the 6th century, used by geomancers and Taoist priests, refer to Xuanyu, or dark jade, as a stone that closes the gate to shadows. It appears not in decorative contexts, but in boundary rituals, during funerals of those who died mad, in doorways where hauntings persisted, or beneath the pillows of infants believed to be born under confused stars. It did not cleanse. It did not warn. It refused. By the Song dynasty, black jade had become a ceremonial item. In elite burial sites, it was not placed with the body, but rather in the four corners of the tomb chamber, facing outward. Always unmarked, always raw, as if its presence alone drew a line that even the unseen would not cross. Later dynasties preserved it in spirit tablets, hidden behind ancestral altars, but its use was whispered, not spoken. Priests noted that the stone did not absorb evil. It ignored it. Demonic forces, they believed, required engagement, recognition, and fear. Black jade offered nothing in return. During the Cultural Revolution, many temple caches were destroyed. But in 1987, in a sealed cave near Guilin, Archaeologists uncovered a hoard untouched by iconoclasts. No jade statues, no coins, only bundles of dark stone bound in hemp, buried under salt and wrapped in silk, inscribed with one phrase, Qui bat nap. Demons do not enter. Modern collectors seek black jade for its grounding, discipline, and calming properties. But the old records never used those words. They said only one thing. It is the stone you place between yourself and the thing that waits. Top number 7, Tektite, the shard that severed spirits. In indigenous Filipino cosmology, batong sunog, burnt stones, were thought to disrupt the path of the Sigbin, a vampiric entity that fed on energy and followed travelers across islands. Carving its name into a tektite and burying it beneath a crossroads was said to scatter its memory and stop its return. It did not come from Earth. Tektite begins as trauma, silica-rich earth, superheated by a meteorite impact until it liquefies, ejects, and hardens mid-air. What lands is neither stone nor glass, but a hybrid born of violence. Scorched black, aerodynamic, and riddled with vesicles where gas once tried to escape. It was never polished. It was never cut. Among Southeast Asian ritualists, it was never touched with bare skin. In the ancient animist cultures of northern Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, tektites, locally known as Rai Kun Sai or heaven stones, were not revered. They were handled with caution. Found buried beneath tree roots or near crater lakes, they were believed to be bonds burned off, the physical fragments of broken covenants between the sky and what lived below. In pre-Khmer rites recorded by French ethnographers in the 19th century, shamans used tektites to sever threads, a phrase that appears repeatedly in palm leaf manuscripts. These weren't threads of fate, they were threads of attachment, specifically when a spirit clung to a person, place, or bloodline beyond what was allowed. The stone was not used to invite, it was used to end. During possession rituals, a single tektite shard was passed over the back of the skull and then thrown into the water. The belief the spirit, still tethered, would follow, and the bond would snap. If the stone sank quickly, the severing was clean. If it floated, the ritual had failed. Tektite was feared by the entities it banished. Modern geology places tektite fields across Australasia and Central Europe, but only in Southeast Asia, where craters still hide beneath dense jungle, was it ritualized as a weapon. Not a charm, not a blessing, a blade. Unlike most sacred stones, tektite was never bound to a single owner. After the rite, it was thrown, buried, and left behind, as if the stone remembered too much of what it cut. In the temple archives on the Mekong floodplain, one fragment was found bound in rattan and sealed with soot. A charcoal note beside it read, "He begged us to keep her." The stone refused. Top number 6, Chlorite Quartz. The stone that pushed spirits. Out among the Cuero of southern Peru, chlorite quartz was not carried as an ornament. It was used as a diagnostic stone, placed above the solar plexus during healing ceremonies known as despacho. In Andean cosmology, when a person was mired or lost in muyu, a loop of obsession, despair, or possession, their inner path was thought to be clogged not by demons, but by uninvited presence. It was never rare, but it was never ordinary. Chlorite quartz, clear or smoky quartz containing mossy green phantoms, is found across the Andes, the Alps, and parts of Central Asia. To geologists, it's a simple case of chlorite inclusions forming during hydrothermal growth. But to the ritualists of pre-Columbian South America, it was more than inclusion. It was infiltration, proof that even light could be invaded. They weren't haunted, they were occupied. And chlorite quartz, with its clouded green core, was used to map the blockage. The process was not gentle. Accounts from early Jesuit observers record scenes where the stone was pressed against the skin, then placed in a bowl of salt water. If bubbles formed or if the quartz grew cloudy during ritual chant, it was declared active, meaning the foreign presence had responded. What followed was not an exorcism. It was displacement. In a rare Quechua manuscript preserved in Cusco's University archive, a ceremony is described where 3 chlorite-bearing stones are arranged in a triangle around the patient. Incense made of chachacoma and llama fat was burned, and the lead ritualist whispered not at the person, but at the stone. The goal was simple: convince the intruding energy that it no longer belongs. Witness accounts suggest that the process worked best when the intruder didn't know it was being expelled. One Cuero healer reportedly said, "You don't pull it out. You make it walk away." Outside the Andes, similar practices emerged. In Ecuador's highland villages, chlorite quartz was wrapped in black thread and tied under cribs to prevent night visitations. In Chilean Mapuche healing, it was buried at the 4 corners of a home to redirect ancestral unrest. The pattern is unmistakable. Wherever chlorite quartz appeared, it wasn't celebrated. It was used, not to welcome spirits, but to show them the door. One cracked specimen from a ruined temple near Paucartambo bears a crude etching, an arrow pointing out of a spiral. Above it, 2 words remain: Ariñan, the yes path. Top number 5, Bronzite, the curse reflector. Bronzite, an iron-rich pyroxene with a shimmering bronze surface, has been collected across Europe since antiquity. But in rural Brittany, Sicily, and parts of Bavaria, it was never polished for beauty. It was carried wrapped in a dark cloth and hidden under floorboards, or buried in fields facing the neighbor's land. It wasn't rare, it wasn't expensive, but it made people afraid to wish someone harm, because among those who believed in harm cast by word or gaze, Bronzite didn't block. It returned. By the 17th century, folk tales had coalesced around a simple fear: if you cursed someone wearing Bronzite, the curse would bounce. The belief didn't originate with nobles or scholars, but with shepherds and herb women, those who lived close to the land and far from the courts. They called it le miroir terreux, the earthy mirror. Church records from the Tyrol region include an account from 1693 of a woman who wore a bronzed pendant during a local trial of possession. After the accused cursed her under interrogation, the woman was unharmed. The man reportedly died 4 days later of a rot in the tongue. Historians have not verified the incident. However, they have identified references to Bronzite rituals in dozens of court depositions involving maleficium, or harm caused by a spell. In some cases, the stone was used not only for defense, but also to elicit confessions. In one Bavarian rite, a priest placed a bronze object between the hands of an accused person and chanted a benediction meant to revert all injustice. If the accused dropped the stone, it was seen as proof they had cast intent. This wasn't superstition alone. Early medical texts record Bronzite being worn to repel foul air and ill thought, often stitched into hats or belts. But among hedge witches and folk healers, its deeper purpose was never medicinal. It was judgmental. Unlike obsidian or onyx, Bronzite wasn't passive. It didn't absorb negativity. It recognized it and sent it back. Even into the 20th century, tales from Poland and rural Ireland warned against insulting someone wearing Bronzite. If you did, your crops might fail, your teeth might ache, or your child might cry for days with no cause. These were not stonecaster myths. These were cautionary tales told by those who believed that intention was a weapon, and Bronzite was the mirror that held it. In 1974, a metallurgist in France testing ancient mining samples found one Bronzite pendant etched with only 2 words: le. Say it. Then he handed it back. Top number 4, Chiastolite, the boundary that bound them. At remote abbeys in Normandy and Saxony, surviving foundations contain chiastolite-bearing granite, strategically placed beneath thresholds and altars. These were not decorative. Medieval masons noted them in diagrams with annotations like signum interdicti, a sign of interdiction. The message wasn't to the living. It was a warning to the realm beneath. Before the church walls were made of stone, the symbol was already embedded in the rock. Chiastolite, a variety of Andalusite, forms naturally in a cruciform pattern. 4 arms, always aligned. No artisan carved them. No monk had to mark them. The cross was part of the crystal's very formation, growing silently inside schist, deep beneath ancient Europe. But what made Chiastolite feared wasn't its shape, it was where it appeared. From Galicia to the Scottish Highlands, stones bearing this natural cross weren't worn as jewelry. They were inserted into thresholds and laid into floor joists and mortared into church foundations, not to protect the sacred, but to trap the unspeakable. By the 12th century, Benedictine records describe a rite called clausum demonium, the demon closing. The ritual involved planting chiastolite along the perimeter of consecrated ground before exorcisms or burials. The belief was simple. Nothing could cross the line. Not spirit, not hex, not force. In some regions, these stones weren't brought into the church. They were the church. Accounts from early 14th century trials of heresy also mention the stone. One Franciscan inquisitor reported that a heretic woman refused to step across a chiastolite threshold during questioning, claiming it burned the feet of things not born of flesh. She was later found hanging by her hair in a locked cell. No rope, no signs of struggle. Skeptics might dismiss such entries as superstition. But even modern geologists note how often chiastolite appears in ritual discard sites, hidden caches of objects deemed too volatile to destroy. Some of these are buried with salt, others sealed with wax, but nearly all sit at boundaries, gates, walls, crypt doors. Because of those who feared the unseen, chiastolite wasn't a weapon. It was a line in the dark, a fixed shape in a world where darkness slipped sideways. It didn't destroy. It prevented. It said, no further. And for those who still practice quiet rituals in the places where the maps fade, it still does. Top number 3, dark blue Kyanite, the blade that severs the current. In Himalayan shamanic traditions, thin shards of kyanite were tied with sinew and inserted at the 4 cardinal points around a possessed individual, not to heal them, but to interrupt the link between host and entity, between mind and intrusion, between soul and something that had no name in language, only in sound. They called it the cord cutter. It was never meant to fight. It was meant to serve. It does not hold memory. It does not retain a charge, and that is precisely why it was chosen. Among crystal practitioners, kyanite is known for a single trait that defies almost every other mineral in its class. It doesn't accumulate energy. No matter how much is poured into it, grief, anger, invocation, none of it stays. It clears, it cuts, it passes through. But before wellness books and mineral apps, there were rituals. And in those rituals, dark blue kyanite was not placed on altars. It was driven into the earth. From 17th century Tibetan manuscripts to scattered oral accounts among Andean mystics, kyanite appears in boundary magic. Its blade-like formations, fragile, sharp-edged, were used in moments of spiritual override when a person no longer recognized their thoughts, when foreign impulses took hold. In one archived record from Ladakh, a healer described a woman who spoke with 6 voices and none of them hers. No herbs worked, no chants held, until a thin shard of kyanite was pressed to her sternum. What followed wasn't an exorcism, it was silence, not peace, cessation. Later analysis of the same ritual tradition shows that kyanite wasn't considered sacred. It was surgical, unblessed, unbound, used only when someone crossed a line inward. Modern collectors admire its striations and superb luster, often oblivious to how it was once stored, not in display cases but wrapped in black cloth, buried in rock salt, and only unearthed when nothing else worked. Because of those who practiced with precision, not faith, dark blue kyanite wasn't a gem. It was a scalpel, a final instrument, for cutting loose what refused to leave. Top number 2, Hematite, the stone that sealed the shadow. In Roman military and ritual practices, hematite was known as sanguis terrae, the blood of the earth. Soldiers wore polished hematite amulets before battle, not simply for protection, but as seals. Seals were intended to lock away the chaotic forces of the battlefield and prevent malignant spirits from crossing into their ranks. It gleams like iron, yet it holds no light. Hematite, an iron oxide mineral, has been mined and shaped by humans for thousands of years. Its distinctive metallic sheen made it a material of choice for tools and pigments, but its spiritual role runs deeper. Ancient texts describe the use of hematite in energy barriers, invisible boundaries set around camps and battlefields, thought to contain spiritual forces unleashed by violence. Priests and augurs used slabs of hematite, arranged in patterns that corresponded to the cardinal directions, to fortify these barriers. The belief was apparent. Once set, the hematite would close the circle, preventing any shadowy presence from slipping through cracks in reality. Beyond Rome, hematite's ritual use echoes in Celtic and Norse funerary customs. In burial mounds, hematite was placed alongside weapons and shields, not as decoration but as a spiritual lock guarding the passage between worlds. In one Norse saga, a chieftain's burial included a black mirror of iron, a polished hematite disc said to reflect the darkness that sought entry. Scholars debate the literal meaning, but its symbolic power remains undisputed. Even today, hematite remains popular in modern spiritual circles, used to ground energy and deflect negativity. But its ancient role was far more tangible, a stone that sealed the energy field, a sentinel standing guard against the unseen. When darkness stirs, it is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it is the quiet force hemmed in by hematite's cold embrace. Top number 1, Seraphinite, the light that darkness fears. Unlike more common protective stones, Seraphinite was never mass-produced or widely traded. Its rarity and the secrecy surrounding its use made it a sacred secret, entrusted only to those who had earned its grace, shamans, healers, and spiritual leaders. It does not blaze with fire, it does not burn with heat. Yet within its dark green depths, a shimmering dance of silver feathers stirs, a silent radiance that has captivated those who seek light amidst shadow. Seraphinite is a rare variety of chlorite mica, primarily sourced from the remote Lake Baikal region of Siberia. Its name evokes angelic beings, the seraphim, due to the stone's delicate wing-like chatoyant patterns. But beyond its ethereal beauty lies a legacy far deeper than ornamentation. For centuries, Siberian shamans and spiritual healers have carried Seraphinite not as mere decoration, but as a talisman of profound spiritual significance. They believed it to be a conduit, a bridge between the earthly and the celestial. During arduous journeys into altered states of consciousness, shamans relied on Seraphinite to guide their souls safely through unseen realms, to summon guardian spirits and to shield themselves from malevolent forces lurking beyond perception. Historical accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries detail its sacred use among the Buryat and Evenki peoples. In ritual garments and healing ceremonies, Seraphinite was sewn into robes or held close to the heart, never casually worn, but reserved for moments of deep spiritual work. These practices were not showmanship, they were lifelines. The stone's shimmering patterns symbolized the wings of angels, seen as emissaries of light that could pierce through the darkest of shadows. In regions long shrouded by Siberian winters and ancient fears, Seraphinite became a beacon, not one that shone with blinding light, but one that glimmered softly, revealing presence and hope where darkness sought to engulf. Modern crystal healing communities often describe Seraphinite as a stone of purification, divine connection, and heart-opening. While these interpretations resonate with ancient beliefs, their original use was far more practical and profound, a tangible reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there is a light that cannot be snuffed out. When carried into battle against unseen forces, be they spiritual, psychological, or emotional, Seraphinite stood not as a weapon, but as a silent promise that light endures, that protection is not always loud, that sometimes the most incredible power lies in gentle illumination. And for those who bore this stone through their darkest trials, Seraphinite was not merely a mineral. It was hope carved in crystal form, a light that darkness feared. These stones were never meant to shine for show. They were chosen for their silence, their resilience, and their unyielding presence against forces no eye could see. In shadows where light falters and hope feels distant, these minerals stood as guardians. Quiet, relentless, and accurate. If one has found its way to you, perhaps it is a sign that the darkness is already receding. Thank you for joining us in this journey through ancient power and forgotten ritual. We'll meet again in the next episode to uncover more stories hidden deep beneath the surface. Until then, stay vigilant and may light guide your way. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your time and curiosity. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and we look forward to welcoming you back for the next chapter. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you soon.